Welcome in everyone to the On the Call podcast. You are listening to Joe Chambers and Spencer Tomset. We are here to talk, learn, and inspire sports broadcasters. Wherever you are, we thank you for listening. On today's episode and on today's season finale, we have one of the greatest sports broadcasters in the soccer business with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Mr. John Strong.
Should I be clapping too, or is that all right if I don't? All right.
You see, they don't give
Ladies
us
and
that much
gentlemen,
applause.
I am very happy. I know Spencer's happy to have you on the. You've had a very busy summer, as we all know. So what is one of the so basically one of the questions, the first couple questions that me and Spencer do is we like to learn about what got you into sports broadcasting. Is there a particular like maybe you're watching a game and you're like, oh, I want to be that, or like what kind of got you into the business?
I think the easiest way to answer that is to say this is the only job that I've ever wanted to have from as young as I can remember. It was always this. And I can't pinpoint precisely exactly why. I think what I've come to understand is there's sort of a romanticism, and it's hard for young kids to understand this. You know, when I was very young, my first love as a sports fan was the Portland Trail Blazers. And in the early 90s, you know, they were regular in the NBA finals, and that was everything. And it was before Ducks football became a thing out here where I'm from in Portland. But back then, most of the games were actually on pay-per-view television locally. So the best way to follow them was on the radio. And I go to bed at night listening to Bill Schonely, who was the legendary longtime voice of the Blazers. He's in the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame now. Listening to him call the Blazers games, and it was just I just knew I wanted to do that without really understanding what that was or how to get there or precisely what it was I loved about it. But I think what I've come to understand is as I said, sort of the romanticism of being the connection between you and your team when you can't be there yourself. And it's different on television to be sure, but you still do get that in bits and pieces. And
For
so
sure.
that was kind of what I wanted to do. And then, you know, got the chance in high school when I thought I was going to be cut from the soccer team, and I probably should have been. That kind of was the kick I needed to really pursue an opportunity to start calling. And again, this is like fall of 2002. So it's hard for young kids to understand. When we went to the principal and we said, hey, we want to call our school's football and basketball games on the internet, he literally was like, what does that mean? What is that? And he told my mom later, he only said yes to get us out of his office because he's like, there's no way. I don't even know. You know, no one knew what that was then. We were on the leading edge of this stuff, but we did it, and it was great. And then got down to the University of Oregon campus radio station, same kind of thing. The early days of internet broadcasting and putting other sports like soccer and women's lacrosse and softball on the internet and high school sports and stuff like that. And you know, just have been in the right place at the right time over and over, and have tried to work really hard to keep and earn and at a certain point deserve the opportunities that I've been given probably a lot sooner than I should have had.
You know, there's so many directions I want to go in from that, but I do have to ask because you have graduated from the University of Oregon, and there's a lot of recent moves around the Ducks. So any thoughts, if any, especially because with Fox, they have the rights to the Pac-12. Any thoughts on the conference realignments as a fellow Duck?
In one sense, it's heartbreaking. I mean, one of my big idols as a broadcaster was Keith Jackson. And for me, Keith Jackson, the Rose Bowl, like those are things that are really, honestly, like one of the really special moments of my life. I got to call twice. I've called games at the Rose Bowl. One in particular, 2015, U.S.-Mexico, Friday night. It was a playoff for the Confederations Cup. It was 90 whatever thousand people. And I made the mistake of spending the afternoon watching old Keith Jackson videos on YouTube. I think I psyched myself out for the whole thing. But it's heartbreaking because I love that history. The history between Oregon and Oregon State's really important. I was never a Pac-12 guy. I was always a Pac-10 guy. So part of it breaks my heart. Part of it, I think that's the reality of where college football needs to move. There's more interest in watching Oregon play Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State than there is watching Oregon play Arizona or Utah. There just is. And I think that's kind of the reality of where this thing's going. So I hope I have a lot of Beavers in my family. My wife's a Coug, actually. She played soccer at Washington State. So I'm very emotionally invested in what their future is going to be as well. But yeah, it's I don't say I'm a Duck fan, I'm a Duck, and there's an important, significant difference behind that. It's multi-generational. So it's a bummer that it has to be this way, but I think these are the types of directions that college football is moving. And my guess, one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill, it was the end of the African campaign in World War II, and he said, "It's not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." And I think that's where we are with college football, with where we're probably going to end up in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
And John, with working on student broadcast opportunities, not just through high school, but at the University of Oregon, a lot of people, you got to go from the Ducks to the Timbers, and then ascend your way to NBC, and then once they lost the rights to the MLS, you went to Fox. What was that moment like for you when you got the call from the Portland Timbers saying, "Hey, we want you to be our next voice"?
It was a slower burn process. I got in 2006 when I was a student as sort of an unpaid intern on it was an internet broadcast. They'd cut the radio budget. The guy who had been the radio broadcaster was working in the SID's office at Oregon, so I knew him from the other work that I was doing. And it was literally, "Hey kid, you know how this internet broadcasting stuff works, right?" And so my role kind of grew. I was working then at the radio station that started airing the games when they went back to radio in 2009. And in 2010, when we knew we were going to MLS, I just want to be the radio voice. My biggest fear was if they bring someone else from the outside to be the TV voice, and if the guy, Andy McNamara, who had been doing radio, if he stays on radio, and now I'm kind of stuck third in line. So my big hope was give Andy the TV gig. He's been here a while. He's done some TV games. Let me be the radio guy, and then I can kind of work my way up. And Merritt Paulson, the owner, and I'll always remember the day and where we were and all the things, sort of said to me offhand, like, "We're going to try you on TV this year." It had never crossed my mind. I mean, I was 24 at the time, so that's outrageously young. And I never really, I had done one TV broadcast of a men's pro lacrosse game, which is a very weird story of how I ended up there. But they tried me out, and I got another one, and kind of it worked. And then it was at lunch with the sort of the president of the business side, and he just casually slipped it in. "So we're going to use you on TV this year." And it was like, "Oh, okay." So that's where I say I got opportunities way sooner than I should have, and that I was definitely way sooner than I was ready for, both emotionally, professionally, experience wise, knowing what not to say. When you're young, you don't know. And I laugh sometimes at the things I said on air, some of the things I did behind the scenes, some of the fires that had to be put out without even me knowing it that I was causing. But yeah, that was an incredible sort of dominoes that started to fall to get that opportunity. And again, it was Timbers getting MLS. That thing could have very easily gone up in smoke, and it almost did a couple times. And so for me to jump into that and get that opportunity, and then Darlington Nagbe scores a goal in 2011 that sets off another series of dominoes. So that's where, again, you can never entirely be prepared because you really don't know when that chance is going to come. You just got to do your best to take it.
Absolutely. And John, I just want to piggyback on something you said about the conference realignment. I was a basketball manager for Mount St. Mary's University, and the Mount is actually switching. Just last year, went from the Northeast Conference, the NEC, to the MAC Conference now. So, and it's happening, as you said, in all sports. But anyway, just want to mention that. But getting back to one of the questions we have is, you've your passport and your travels have probably been getting you've been really busy this year with traveling. I
got a lot of weird looking visas in my passport. Yeah. I've spent more time in Russia than most Americans probably ever will again. I'll tell you that.
I have one stamp on my passport, and that was to Jamaica with my lovely girlfriend, Taylor. One of the things I wanted to mention is you had a lot of travel this year with the World Cups, obviously with, Qatar and New Zealand. Just tell me, we just want to learn, like, how was that experience being able to call probably the biggest sporting event in the entire world? How was that? I'm almost certain you're very honored that you were able to have that opportunity, but just explain, the ups and the downs during that time. Being the
it's interesting, and both the the men in Qatar and the women in Australia, very different experiences. The two men's World Cups I've done from Qatar to Russia, very, very different experiences. Absolutely, it's a process I had to go through really across 2017 to go from twisting myself into knots of anxiety and stress, trying to be perfect, being given these opportunities and make sure that, the bosses or media critics or whatever, as a young broadcaster and as an American, I had two sort of things working against me in my own mind, but also in the reality of how the business works. And by 2018, I was able to turn that around very intentionally to be like, gosh, this is incredible. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy this. And worst case scenario, if they take it away from me, then I got to enjoy it. I would prefer that than other games like that US-Mexico Rose Bowl game in 2015. I didn't enjoy nearly as well as I could because I was so stressed about being perfect and about how I was performing. And so for Qatar, it is funny because in Russia, they laugh now at what our travel schedule was. We would call a game, we'd eat dinner, we'd go to the airport, we'd be on a 2 a.m. flight through Moscow, somewhere else, call a game the next day. I mean, it was wild. Our travel schedule, the hours we kept were insane. Qatar was the opposite. We slept in the same bed every single night. We commuted sometimes as little as 20 minutes to the stadium. And it was just this process of calling a game every single day and sort of wake up, go to the gym, make yourself some breakfast in your little kitchenette, do prep work and hop in the car and drive to the stadium. But absolutely having those moments of one of the last sort of bucket list big things that I didn't get to before was calling a US game at a World Cup. And those moments, those hours before the Wales game of like, oh my gosh, like this is really happening. And then also, going into that final, and as that final played out and finishes, and you're just sort of having it's almost an out of body experience. Like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm getting to do this. Little did we know how many people were watching, which is probably better we didn't know in that time because it would have terrified me. But I think that's something that I'm very intentional about, is just enjoy the experience and take mental snapshots, but also I have a lot of memorabilia. I have big sort of canvas prints that I've made of basically taking like a panoramic photo during the national anthems from our spot in the World Cup finals. And I have those on my wall and other things like that. And just try to, because again, it's either because I'm fired from this or I retire or someone better comes along or something, this will end eventually. And so it's like, can I just have those good memories of those special experiences? And yeah, you try to do your best work, you try to do justice to the game, but also there has to be an element of cherishing how precious the opportunity is, because only, technically two people per country, because Andres Cantor is there in Spanish, but only if all that many people get to do that, call a World Cup final, and that's a really incredible thing that I've been able to do twice already is remarkable.
Can I interject really quickly? John, when you said you took a canvas photos, I think that's the coolest thing, because I'm a collector of vintage art and like vintage signs and stuff like that. So when you said you took like a panoramic photo of the national anthems being played during the World Cup, I was like, that has to be such a really neat photo. Now that sounds awesome. And then when you mentioned the Wales game, I remember being in the airport at a Buffalo Wild Wings watching that game, and I was like, just like seeing the U.S. back in the World Cup for the first time in 8 years. No, yeah, 8 years. It was just like, wow. Like, and then the fact that you were the guy that was calling that, I can't imagine how, like, what was, like you said, going through your mind, like just how amazing and how, my grandfather says it, but how blessed you are to be in that situation. It must have been
and I'll tell you that the big one was the fact that Tim Weah scored fairly early, and the fact that I felt good about the call. That was really significant. Like, they talk about goalkeepers getting a good early touch of the ball. Getting an early call in, and I felt really good about that. Was huge for my confidence. That was huge for my mental well-being. Like, okay, the rest I can do. I know what I'm doing now. It's but you do have those moments where it is familiar, but it is different. And yeah, that whole thing is again, I could go on for an hour about just that night, but trying to really appreciate how special it is, because you never know if or when that opportunity will come back again.
I do have a follow-up on the travel experiences, but I can't remember if I told you this, John, but the first experience where I knew I need to figure out how to get in contact with John Strong, because I'd known your work plenty of times before, but my moment was in December of 2022. Not when you expect to be watching the World Cup, obviously, because of the
For sure.
FIFA movements. And we could have hours-long conversation about that move from the summer to the winter and everything, but not to get too derailed. I was in Western Michigan. My friend was graduating with her degree from WMU in December, which, side note, your friend really has to be great and amazing and awesome if everyone says yes to go to Western Michigan in December for her graduation. So shout out to Aaliyah on that one. But this was the day after her graduation, her Sunday. I had told everyone, hey, so the World Cup final is going to be at 10, I think it was 9 or 10 o'clock Eastern is where it translated out to. I said, if you guys want to sleep in, that's fine, but I'm waking up to watch this. And several people woke up. The others woke up a little bit later as it went into the second half. And I'm surrounded by several people who barely even watch soccer and barely even, know about the significance. And of course, me as the broadcaster among the group, I'm going to tell them, yeah, so this is what an offsides is. There's this kind of things and such. But even with them, even everyone was engaged. And I'm sure we as broadcasters, we kind of have a little bit of neutrality when it comes to compliments and such. But you, John, definitely, I've heard you in interviews talk about where you called the game not for the soccer experts and not for those who are sticklers of the game, where you called it more as if everybody's watching. And I saw that unfold with the people next to me because they had barely watched soccer and they were just as engaged and just as enthusiastic about it. So that was a special moment in, 10 a.m. on a Sunday in winter in Michigan, watching that in an Airbnb on television and such. That was pretty special.
And I appreciate that. And that is it. That was a very intentional thing that Stu and I were, and again, I keep using this word intentional, but we talked about it over and over and over in the months before the World Cup and coming into it is let's have that broad tent. And yeah, it can delve off into a much larger thing. And I think there's a sensitivity sometimes in smaller sports because there have been plenty of examples and plenty of traps that can be fallen into where in trying to get who you think in your mind as a non-soccer fan to understand or enjoy it, it almost goes too far and it becomes overly patronizing. But the other side of that is the genius of John Madden, as everyone has often said, is that he allowed people, and Keith Jackson talks about it in interviews all the time, people that don't regularly watch the sport, allowing them to understand what they're seeing. And I think it's a trap that broadcasters fall into, is trying to look smart, trying to appear authentic, trying to sort of get that stamp of approval from the experts as you use a lot of jargon and a lot of lingo. And I just think that there can be a time and a place and a value for that. But if the term itself is broadcasting, and if you're confusing or just putting a wall up to someone watching to be like, wait, what? I don't understand that. It's something so subtle, but it's so brilliant that Stu did when we did the U.S. England game, which we had identified as that was going to be the big one that got the biggest audience, and at the final ended up beating it. And the U.S. had made a formation change for that game, and all Stu did was instead of saying 4-4-2, he just said 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 forwards. It adds a second and a half. It adds 3 words, but you allow that one person sitting there going, "What's 4-4-2?"
Yep.
That's all it is, and so I think that's something that we really felt vindicated about because we got so many comments from people that resonated with, and whether it was people that are big time broadcasters, I was a little taken aback by some of the comments we got from some people in the business, but even just women that sing in the church choir with my mom. And they said how much they enjoyed it and how much they understood. Again, it's a simple concept. It's hard sometimes to do, but that's what I'm most proud of, I think, from that World Cup is because we put a focus on it and how many people we sort of help bring in that tent to enjoy something and to enjoy a game that is not something that they thought they were going to be enjoying or regularly do. That's the job. And that's something that, as I said, we really felt that we nailed, and that was pretty cool.
So on your travels, I noticed one of the cool things. So I will say I love that in your Twitter bio, or X bio as it's now changed to, is that you say spending time with my family instead of checking my mentions. I think that's pretty special. But
very true. Since February of 2018, I've not looked at anything anyone has written or said about me on social media, or indeed, I've not read any article that has been written about me or us in those years since. So if y'all are out there criticizing me, I ain't seeing it. If you're saying nice things, I apologize. I appreciate it, but I will tell you, that can be just as much of a poison, because you can have that one negative thing in your head takes you off your game, but you also can fall in the trap of thinking that people are really tuning in to listen to you speak, and that can be just as dangerous for a broadcaster.
Absolutely. And one of the things you do on your Twitter very well is you take photos of of stuff you're doing on broadcast or that stuff, because I loved seeing the kind of insights to Qatar and seeing like walk around. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, because we do this on the podcast where we dig into the kind of rituals of broadcasters and the superstitions. You have a tradition where, if I'm correct, it's either local ice cream or gelato and like coffee beforehand. How did that start?
Well, I tell you, it's probably Stu's, one of his two favorite stories about me is when I got really sick in Samara, Russia in 2018 at the World Cup. And it was 1000% my fault. So what I started doing to do the game the next day, Brazil, Mexico, is they sold kind of like when you're in school, like it's those little cups of ice cream with like the wooden spoon in them. And in the little media cafe, and I bought one to have then and then one to take with me and have just before the game, just to try to get my stomach to survive the 90 minutes. And I did the rest of the thing. So what ended up happening is at Lusail, which was sort of the big main stadium in Qatar, they had an area nearby, Lusail Boulevard, which it was a really cool scene. It was just a pedestrian, only street, big wide boulevard, shops and restaurants. And so we started having a tradition of, because I think the first time we got there just way too early. So we're like, well, we won't go inside yet. And so every time we did a game at Lusail, we'd sit at this little coffee shop on the corner, and there was gelato and espresso. And we just kind of watched the scene, and there was always live music and people walking around. And that's the kind of stuff I love, because it is that wonderful, I think, the juxtaposition in some ways of like, yeah, we're the American broadcast crew, but we're just going to sit here and chill and eat ice cream. I don't think you would see the BBC guys doing that, in part because they'd be mobbed because no one knows or cares who we are. But it was also a very deliberate thing, because when you're in this business, you oftentimes don't see. I heard guys, it was Robert Griffin III on the broadcast. It was a Washington game the other week, and he was saying how, when you're a player or a broadcaster, you never get to tailgate. And that was part of why we liked about it, to actually experience the scene a little bit and get some of the vibe. It was why it was really fun in Australia at the Women's World Cup. I got to go to one of the semifinals and the final just with my family and be in the stands. And that was really cool, because just to be a normal fan at a World Cup game. Rob Stone, I filled in for him as host 2 days in Australia, and both days there were games in Sydney that he went to. And he said at dinner one night, he's like, I've done however many World Cups, I'd never been to a World Cup game until Australia. So those are the types of things where, when you get the opportunity to walk instead of take the car, to sit outside and have a coffee, those sorts of things, again, that goes into like just soak in the wonderful experience. But yeah, Stu will tell you, food, coffee, any time of day. Yes, absolutely. You want anything? Sure, I do. You bet.
Before we shift gears, I do have one thing I wanted to ask. How many showers did you have to take per day in Qatar?
It wasn't that hot.
Okay.
Unless that's no. So that was a huge misnomer. That's why they moved the tournament to November and December. It wasn't hot at all. It was like being in LA. It would top out in the low 80s. And certainly by the end of the tournament, in the evening when the sun would set, it was, yeah. So that was the funny thing, is like, again, people sort of missed that point. It was lovely weather. It was very hazy there, which had a wonderful sort of ethereal effect, because especially when you would go west out of Doha, and you'd get to the desert, and it was like this sort of pink orange haziness glow everywhere. It was like you were on the set of Star Wars, because it's similar to where Star Wars was filmed in Morocco, kind of that same kind of feeling. So, but yeah, it was terrific. And Australia was lovely. It was like sunny, and you could wear sweatshirts in the middle of the summer. For us, it was terrific. So I've loved the weather. The last 2 World Cups, we're gonna roast in North America in 2026. That's
That
gonna
is
be awful.
true.
We're gonna die in that heat. But we've had terrific World Cups weather-wise.
My buddies are already saving up for the game in Philadelphia, or whoever it is, because Baltimore and DC, I heard, did 2 separate bids where they probably should have just done one bid altogether, and probably would have been better at M&T Bank Stadium than FedEx Field. But I remember, like, my buddies were like, "Yeah, Joe, we should do that," and I was like, "Guys, that's like 4 years away." I'm trying to think about the future. But John, I want to piggyback on one thing. Favorite ice cream flavor, since you're a big ice cream guy, it sounds like.
I will say I was in Qatar. It was always pistachio gelato because that's the local flavor. Generally speaking, I'm a cookies and cream guy, but we live not far from a place called Salt and Straw, which has the really wild sort of artistic flavors. So I'm willing to try just about anything, though.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, I'm a cookie dough guy myself, but I enjoy cookies.
That's probably
cream.
number 2 for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
cookies and cream, cookie dough, chocolate,
Oh, yeah.
right there, my top 3.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Major League Soccer has obviously changed in the last few years in their media rights deals with Apple TV Plus. I'm curious to know, because you and I have had this conversation about sometimes, especially as the lead, in essence, you've been regarded to as the voice of American soccer. And in your case, you've talked to me about how you've had some, behind the scenes, off the record conversations with Don Garber and other executives and things like that. When did you know or first hear word about Apple TV getting the deal? Anything you may have known behind the scenes on that? And I guess, did you have any discussions with Apple to be their lead voice? Where did it result from there?
Well, and I'll tell you, and it's something that's pretty neat, is we have really good relationships with Don Garber, Gary Stevenson, Seth Bacon, a lot of people at the league office. Oftentimes when I'm in New York for other things, even, they'll invite me up, and it's very fun to have a relationship with the people at the top. And just sometimes when you're a national broadcaster, you need to get your wrist slapped for something, and that's happened a couple times. Other times it just is neat to get a different perspective on things, but also understand that the work you're doing is valued by, again, we work for Fox, we don't work for MLS, but we're in partnership with MLS, and the fact that our work is valued by them and the league executives and the owners as well, that's a really neat part of getting to do a job like this. I'm trying to remember. I think we knew that because it was kind of a messy process to get to where it ended up, and it was more first Fox isn't doing a deal, and then Apple has the deal, and then Fox is doing a deal, very 11th hour. Really, it was basically at MLS Cup, and once we went to Qatar, that was coming together. I never had any real conversation with Apple just because we knew we had this Fox deal. So it was kind of redundant in that regard. And they were building out their own things. And I'll say, Jake Ziven, who's been calling the games at Taylor Twellman, he's one of my good friends in this business, and he lives in Portland, and he's been the Timbers announcer for a while. And it's wonderful to have yet another Portland person involved at that level. I think it's terrific for the fans. I can have experiences of the challenges that I've had being a fan, trying to find in past years the broadcast. Is it streaming? Is it not? Am I blacked out from the ESPN Plus option? Those sorts of things. To have it all in one place has been terrific. The production quality has been terrific. We have so many friends of ours that I've worked with at NBC and at Fox that are behind the scenes. A guy who was he was our statistician in high school. Spencer is one of the production managers on this deal, working a lot of games. So yeah, I mean, he was part of the crew for the LAFC Miami game the other week. Now we got Katie Witham involved again, one of my very best friends, full stop, let alone in the business. It's created some odd scenarios. I think this will absolutely be a work in progress for everyone involved to figure out not just the challenges of essentially building a sports network from scratch, which is what Apple, MLS, and they've worked with IMG have had to do, but then also how does this Fox deal fit in? This will be a multi-year process before it solidifies itself in any sort of a final answer. But I just think there's so many people that have worked so hard behind the scenes to get it up and get it rolling. It is something that's a huge part of, and it means a lot to me. My history with MLS, which dates back to 2011 now, and really since 2013 as a national voice, it's a decade now, and that's something that is very special to me. So I'm in a good position. I love Fox. Fox is my home. We have a lot of wonderful things we're doing. This UEFA contract we have, CONCACAF contracts that we have, Copa America and the Euros next summer. So I'm hoping that things with MLS will sort of sort themselves out as we go, and kind of just the unique nature of this deal. But the nice thing is I don't have to worry. And I'm very blessed to be in that position, because a lot of very good broadcasters have had to worry and are still worrying about they're going from a stable situation as a local team broadcaster to what has been very naturally an unstable situation, just because everything's new and everyone's trying to figure this out. So that's been very good that Stu and I, and we've talked about this a lot, can kind of let's just do our work well, and things will sort of sort themselves out long term with whatever, this thing's going to look like.
Just to continue on that conversation, though, because each of us as broadcasters, we kind of have like our niches of like things we can tell you stats about and that kind of stuff. I think MLS, at least, and I'm sure you have an opinion on this as well. I feel like MLS has kind of laid the groundwork for how things are going to shape up for leagues going forward, because in my opinion, the regional sports network model is dead. You've seen that recently with Major League Baseball, in how their fiasco is going on right now, specifically with Sinclair Valley Sports and losing their network deals in that regard. I think also the NBA media rights deal that's up in the next few years, that's going to really kind of shape the landscape. But I think it's certainly good, because there's still, at this point in time, there's still a need for sport to be on any of the major 4 cable networks of Fox, CBS, ABC, and or NBC. But I also think there's a great potential for, because and Joe is going to ask about this later when we talk about the growth of soccer, and obviously Messi has had a huge impact for Apple and the league in that regard recently. But I think MLS is kind of at the forefront of what the media landscape is going to look like, in terms of no blackouts, one service for all. And it doesn't necessarily threaten local broadcasters' jobs, because I know Apple did a pretty good job with picking up those local guys to go on their platform. But from my perspective, I think it's a decent thing. It's just like you mentioned, it's going to take time for this stuff to kind of settle and actually get to where it needs to be.
And one of the nice things quickly is that by mandating home radio broadcasts, there's a lot of local broadcasters who weren't picked up by Apple, but their clubs have taken care of them, made them club employees, given them the radio gig, having them do other things, other media things for the club. So that's been nice to see that just about everyone's been taken care of in this, which was a concern for a lot. Yeah, I think it's funny. When you say guinea pig, it sounds like a pejorative. So maybe tip of the spear is a better way to phrase it. That absolutely MLS, as they were incidentally with VAR, and as they've tried to be in other ways where FIFA and IFAB has allowed them, MLS has always been a league that's saying we're willing to be innovators. We're willing to be out in front of it. And I think clearly it was still a value, very, very much so, to the league to make sure they had a linear television presence. And I do agree. I think it's important to have that. There's still a lot more people you can reach. It's still broadcasting. It's still important to capture casual fans. That was one of the things with MLS Cup last year. And with the MLS Cups that we've done have been, I think, 3 of the most watched broadcasts in MLS history, because we're putting it on network TV. Twice it was on a Saturday prime time, I guess 3 times technically. The last one was on a college football Saturday, but it was leading into a World Series Game 6. And it captures people that might not necessarily know when or how to seek out other games. In saying that, I mean, my children, they watch shows by pressing a button on the remote and speaking into it. They have no conceptualization whatsoever about TV channels ever, or networks, or any of that stuff. It's all just a blur to them. And so I do think that as we go forward generationally, technologically, it's not really going to matter all that much, as long as you can break down those barriers of entry, whatever the form that takes. Is that money? Is that just making sure it's attached to something else? That's the benefit of being attached to Apple, is you're in the Apple ecosystem, which is important rather than being completely 100% on your own. So I think it's absolutely a test case for other leagues. I mean, even I'll say as well, as an NFL fan, I kind of love that YouTube TV got Sunday Ticket, and I never,
it's great.
Yeah, I'd never been a direct TV because it just was always better for us to have cable with physically where we are and stuff like that. But I'm flying home yesterday from the game I did in LA, and I'm watching 2 games on a tablet and a phone on an airplane because of NFL Sunday Ticket streaming. So that's terrific. So yeah, I think there's a natural aversion to change. There's that natural resistance to things being different, or the fact that it isn't maybe what other leagues have. But I really do think long term, MLS will be the normal rather than the outlier.
That's awesome. John, who's your NFL team?
Denver Broncos. My dad's from Colorado. My great uncle, Broncos give out, they call it priority number, which is basically in what order did you get your season tickets. My great uncle is in the triple digits, so he was among the first 1,000 Broncos season ticket holders in the AFL days. So that's a big multi-generational family thing. We have, our extended family has the same table at the same sports bar down the street from Mile High Stadium every Sunday for years, and a big group of, I think we're at 10 or 12 tickets now in total. So yeah, it's a pretty cool family thing to be a part of. Yeah.
That's awesome. John, I just want to talk about the growth of soccer in the United States in regards to the MLS, the World Cup, and obviously Messi joining Inter Miami. Just talk about what you've seen within the growth of soccer in the United States.
Well, I think there's a couple different pieces to it. One of the points that I've made before, even to audiences of Fox Sports executives, is to remind us all that MLS, what is it, 28 years now, I think MLS is. If you were to look back at what the NFL was 28 years into its existence, if you were to look at what the NBA was 28 years into its existence, it would be utterly unrecognizable as compared to what it is now. And yet, understandably, we want to make apples to apples comparisons between MLS and other sports leagues, or indeed other soccer leagues, where you're talking about countries that it's not just that soccer is the most popular sport, soccer is the only sport in most other countries around the world. So it would be easy to look at MLS comparing to other leagues in the US, comparing to other soccer leagues around the world, and have a very negative viewpoint. But I think if you actually really look at it in the proper context, what MLS is right now is miraculous. In this country, in this technological climate, when it's competing against soccer leagues from around the world that are exactly as available now as MLS is, very different to 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you could just be on ABC and guarantee yourself 1 million people watching no matter what. That's not the case anymore. So for MLS to be thriving as it is, to have such strong attendance in cities like St. Louis and Cincinnati and Kansas City, places. I remember being in Atlanta before their first ever game, Atlanta, Georgia soccer. And then it was 50,000 people at Bobby Dodd Stadium. And it's like, okay, this is going to work. We're fine. I think it's been incredible. And there's been a real acceleration since about 2015 anyway. Then you add in, we've had 2 really significant World Cups. And the irony is, in situations and people thought, well, this is going to be where soccer falls. The U.S. men aren't in a World Cup. That's going to be a ratings disaster for Fox. We shattered ratings records in Russia for any number of different ways. When the World Cup then was moved to November, December, this is going to be a ratings disaster for Fox, because now instead of having the stage to itself, it's got to compete with football and everything else. We shattered ratings records again, multiple times. You had the most watched soccer game in American history, didn't even involve the U.S., and it was, to your point earlier, Spencer, it was on a Sunday morning. We improved ratings on Fox NFL that Sunday by 20% compared to the week 14 or whatever it was a year before. So it is incredible how soccer has grown. It's incredible how MLS has grown. And then you add Lionel Messi in. And it's, the phrase rocket fuel, I don't even think does it justice. It is. And the irony is, you could say, well, had it been Ronaldo, he's more comfortable in English and he's more comfortable with media interviews. And maybe he likes Zlatan, like David Beckham. He'd be on Good Morning America. He'd be on Sports Center and those things in a way that Lionel Messi's not as comfortable. But Messi's just, I mean, he's stupid good. What he does on his own.
Incredible.
And the funny thing of it is, you get criticism from people. Had Messi shown up and not been scoring goals, that would have been proof that Messi isn't trying and it's a retirement league and this whole, and yet he comes and scores goals. So that's proof MLS is bad. So whatever it is, people have their mind made up about MLS. I ignore them anymore. What he's done, what he's brought, hopefully for many years to come, is remarkably special and amazing. I fully expected him to walk away from Argentina. I still think he should, because why would you have this ultimate riding off into the sunset moment to win that World Cup in Qatar? What, are you going to lose a World Cup quarterfinal, in Atlanta, and that's going to be the end? But he's winning World Cup qualifiers for him, so he ain't going anywhere. It's been really special, I think, and that's the key, is to make sure, whether it's the broadcast distribution of the games, whether it's the surrounding cast on his team, whether it's the surrounding cast in the league, just making sure that everyone is pulling in the same direction to take advantage of this opportunity for however long it's going to last. But, I don't know. Will we look back on it as being somewhat akin to when Larry Bird and Magic Johnson came into the NBA, potentially? I don't know. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but it's pretty darn cool to see.
Have you had the chance to meet Lionel Messi yet?
I've never met him. Our access to players and coaches is pretty much zero. It's a very different, yes, with the US, but it's a very different thing when you go to a World Cup, and it's hard sometimes for people to understand this. It's so different from American sports TV. We don't have access to players and coaches outside the US. We don't control the pictures. I always laugh sometimes of people criticizing the CBS production on a Champions League game. It's like CBS takes a world feed, the same as we did when we had it, the same as Turner did when they had it. It's the same. People will say, the pictures look better on Telemundo than Fox. They're the same pictures. It's the same broadcast. It's literally the same pipe across the Atlantic. So those sorts of things were very much at arm's length as compared to what it's like in MLS and what it's like with the US. I'm also not necessarily as hardcore about meeting people, taking pictures with them, those sorts of things. It's cool when it happens. I'm not as into it. But yeah, the dude's a special player. What I am hoping is that he's around long enough for Miami to play a game at the Portland Timbers, because I think that it would just be neat to see, but also to be able to, because we have our season tickets, and sort of have my son come and watch him and all that. I think that'd be pretty neat.
So transitioning again to that, we're kind of getting close to the sunset here. So several years back, you were honored winning the Oregon Sportscaster of the Year award for the National Sports Media Association.
I've got it right just across from me in my office. Yeah,
perfect. And it's certainly been a while, to my knowledge, since you've been to either Salisbury or now Winston-Salem for the NSMA banquet. But I'm interested to know, what does the NSMA mean to you?
That was a really cool thing. It was something that one of my friends and mentors, John Canzano, he was the best man at my wedding. Sort of, you say orchestrated, it sounds like conspiratorial, but he pushed behind that hard because he wanted to see me get recognized for the work that I had been doing. And I think it's twofold. There's an inherent trap to fall in if you get too caught up in individual accolades, because understanding, again, people aren't tuning in to hear you, they're tuning in to watch the game. But I think particularly in situations where, I think of it more from a local broadcasting standpoint, because I think it is getting the local radio voice, the local TV voice, when local TV is going away in so many places, and when local radio is not what it once was, because radio isn't necessarily what it once was, to still have that recognition of the boots on the ground at the local level, whether it's television and radio, whether it's newspaper, whatever it is. I think that's really key. I think it's really important. And it's always something I like when the awards come out, because I get the emails and stuff, and I look at, okay, like who won it in Nebraska, who won it in Idaho, who won it in some of the smaller states, for men and women that are doing really hard work, but maybe they're outside of the glare of national broadcasting and they're outside of the glare of the major media markets, but their work is no less important and valuable. It's something that you learn as a broadcaster that I think is really key. Every game you do is the biggest game in the world to someone, and maybe not to tens of millions of people, but maybe it's to grandma and grandpa. Maybe it's to, someone that's sitting in a hospital bed that just needs the distraction. Maybe it's one of the first points of feedback I got as a broadcaster was one of the sophomore running backs on the football team in high school because he had mono, so he didn't get to go to any of the games that fall. He was like one of our 4 listeners. So having that recognition, I think, and acknowledgement of the work that men and women are putting in on the local level outside of some of the big spotlights, I think is really significant beyond just the larger sense of professional organizations connecting with people that do what you do, that understand the weirdness, but also the unique kind of fun of what you do. If it's a chance for professional development as well, I think that's an important thing. It's easy to just kind of be doing this and never get feedback and never really know, am I good at this or not? And how do I get better? So those are all things that I think are really valuable in any sort of context. Yeah, the fact that I've got a cool glass statuette in my office is neat. It doesn't mean that I'm a great broadcaster necessarily. It means that I've got a couple votes, but it's a nice memory for me in particular because it's state of Oregon. When I was on the radio in Portland, when I was the Timbers local broadcaster, and just reminding myself of when I was there and how amazing that was and how I had these fanciful dreams, and never get too caught up in thinking what I do now is normal.
So you mentioned it with your mentor as we finally take this home. I quote the executive director of the NSMA, Dave Gorin, who we had earlier on in this season. He's told us, the adage is it's not what you know, it's who you know. Takes it even a step further. It's not who you know, it's who knows you and what they know about you and what they say about you in that regard. What from your career and your experiences, what are some of the most meaningful relationships you've had, and what do you think are the most effective methods for building relationships in this industry?
Not being a jerk, not taking yourself too seriously, understanding that it's sports and it's meant to be fun, and understanding that all of this can be taken away very quickly. And none of us are really in control. We could get a new executive at Fox. We could be bought by some giant corporation tomorrow, and that person doesn't like the sound of my voice, and I'm out. That's how it is. And by not taking yourself too seriously and by not defining yourself by your job, you avoid hopefully those traps. Stu Holden is one of my very best friends in the world, and I get to call games with him, and I've called over 300 with him, and he and I talk every couple of days, and mostly we talk a lot about the business, but also just about our kids and our marriages and just life. I've been lucky, in fact, to have an awful lot of strong friendships from people that I've worked with. And in the last few days, people like Brian Dunseth and Danielle Slayton that I've not worked with for years, but really wonderful friendships. And people behind the scenes as well. Shaw Brown, who's been hugely influential as a producer, but as a mentor and a guide. I mentioned John Canzano. I'm hopefully getting coffee with him soon. It's been a decade since I left the radio station, but he and I are still very close friends. We live 5 minutes from one another in the Portland suburbs. That's what matters. You forget the games. The games become weird, hazy memories. They become YouTube clips. It's the relationships and the times outside of the game that matters the most. One name that's worth mentioning, I said, I was starting as a broadcaster in high school, and all my stuff at the University of Oregon with my buddy Eric, and he's our stats guy and research assistant at these World Cups. I've done 4 World Cups with him now. I've traveled across the world with him. I do the World Cup final, Argentina, France. 25 million people are watching that shootout. And I've got Stu on my right and Eric on my left, 2 of my closest friends in the world. And I feel bulletproof because I have those 2 guys supporting me next to me. That's what matters. When I talk to Carlos Di Molina, who was our producer in Qatar, I don't really talk to him about the intricacies of the business. I tease him about getting him to eat late night shawarma at 2 a.m. in Al Janoub, Qatar. because that was way outside his comfort zone. So I guess, again, it sounds very simple, but a lot of people get it wrong in this business. You can get an awful long ways being a jerk and being very focused on internal politics and chopping everyone else down to lift yourself up. You can get very far. You can. You might not get as far as you want. And at the end of the day, this is going to go away. And what are you going to have left? And that's something that I have really tried to focus on is, if and not if, when this is taken away from me, what will I have? It's relationships, it's memories, it's people in my life, starting with my wife and kids, but then radiating out to other wonderful friendships that I have. I haven't worked with Katie Witham for a while now. She's still one of my closest friends, who was a reporter for years on MLS. There's a lot of people that I could pick up the phone and call if I really needed them. And that's special to have. And some of them are my bosses. That's something I love about Fox. And it's different. We've heard from people that have come from other networks, and they come to Fox and they say that's not normal. That's not the case. A lot of other networks, that Fox emphasizes family. And whether that's any number of our executives that will answer my phone call, the soccer guy, I can get people on the phone if I really have an issue, but also when it's, hey, I'd like to bring my family down to Australia during this Women's World Cup to be with me. Absolutely. We'll take care of the logistics. We'll make sure they got a ride from the airport. We'll make sure, like, those sorts of things. Like, it's so that's really special. And that's earned through work of just trying to be a good person and treat people well, regardless of whether you think they're on your level or whether you think you're more important or any of that garbage. Treating people well has paid off significantly for me. And at a certain point, it's going to be a benefit of the doubt when someone wants to fire me and someone else is like, but he's a good dude, let's keep him around. So that'll work out in my favor.
Gotcha. John, again, we really appreciate this interview. Again, this is our season finale, and we started off with a good episode. We're ending on a very good episode as well. So you're welcome. I appreciate your time. Ladies and gentlemen, feel free to look us up on Patreon if you'd like to support the podcast. And if you have any questions or suggestions for season 2, please feel free to email us at podcastonthecall@gmail.com. Again, that's podcastonthecall@gmail.com. John, thank you once again. Any other last words you have?
I'm going back to my real job now, which is taking my son to soccer practice and then fixing dinner for my family. The rest is pretend and make believe.
Gotcha. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And this has been Spencer and Joe on the call.